Right, been meaning to do this for a while, but here we are. And hopefully this will work because I'm using really high technology here and a kid's Play-Doh to hold my phone on a tripod. So I'll try and keep it short. The whole point of this video was basically to sort of explain why what people think is the Catholic Church has got pedophiles priests running rampant throughout it. And the reason is because it's not the Catholic Church at all, and it hasn't been for a very long time. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's a cop-out and whatever. And, you know, the reality is unfortunately simple and yet hard to accept for a lot of people. The simple fact is that between 1963 and 1965, the Vatican released what became known as the Vatican Two documents. These are 16 documents that pretty much threw on their head everything that the Catholic Church had said and believed until that point. What I'm saying is the Vatican Two documents are completely heretical, and there'll be a link just below this video to a document that is quite easy to read. It's only about 16 pages long and only highlights the main heresies of Vatican II. Now, regardless of whether you believe in the Catholic Church, whether you're a Christian or not, whatever, the simple fact is that from the beginning until 1958, for sure, the Catholic Church had certain beliefs. And these were, originally figured out by the people who put together the Bible and pretty much stayed the same without very little change over the years. What happened is over the years that you got a little bit of clarity on certain concepts and so on. And all of it was pretty much codified in 1917. So that by the early 1900s, the various popes, prelates and whatever had realized that the church was being infiltrated, and they decided to try and compile the rules of the church in one place, because up until that time, documents were spread through 2,000 years of history, and where does that rule come from, and where's the origin of that? So they collated all this stuff, and in 1917 they produced a code of canon law, which I've got here. Just one sec. So you can buy this on Amazon. There you go. So that's, I don't know, $60, $70, something like that. So if you're interested, you want to go through it, it's in there. Now the thing is, this code of canon law was applicable and valid in 1963 and in 1958. Now the interesting thing about this document is that, along with many other interesting parts of it, but it has a very interesting canon in it. And I don't know if this comes out the right way around because it's reversed on the phone, so maybe it's illegible, I don't know. But anyway, that's Canon 188, which basically says that any office becomes vacant upon the fact and without any declaration by tacit resignation recognized by the law itself if a cleric, and then it lists 8 points. And number 4 is publicly defects from the Catholic faith. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that, if you publicly say I'm no longer Catholic, well, then that's that. But what about if you just profess and speak heresy? I mean, that could be error, right? You could just be a priest that's a bit dumb or doesn't know the rules or is confused, and you could misspeak. That could just be an error. Now, an error is not heresy. You could say heresy in an error, but doesn't make you a heretic. If, however, you persist in saying heretical things day after day after day, after it has become absolutely patently obvious, and you've been told multiple times by multiple sources that what you're saying is wrong, and you persist in doing that, you persist in saying something that goes completely against the rules, well, then you're a persistent heretic. Now, a persistent heretic does fall under this definition. In other words, if you pretend to be a Catholic, but at the same time you profess that it is perfectly fine to, marry people against their will or rape them or something like that, well, that's clearly not Catholic teaching, and you are a heretic. And if somebody corrects you and says, look, that's just wrong, what you're saying is just nonsense, and you persist in it again and again and again, well, you become a persistent heretic, and therefore you automatically vacate your office according to this Canon Law of 188. Now, when does somebody become a persistent heretic? What if they say something 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? You know, it's common sense. Most of the rules of the Catholic Church, the ones in here anyway, are common sense stuff. So when do you become a persistent heretic? Well, how about 17 years? How about you have 17 years to correct yourself? When everybody around you, many millions of people around the planet are telling you that is wrong, your colleagues, you know, people that lay people, and you just ignore that for 17 years in a row, I'd say that pretty much makes you a persistent heretic. Now, why do I say 17 years? Because Vatican II documents came out between 1963 and 1965. So between 1963 and 1965, the Vatican II documents came out, which are heretic. By 1983, so 20 years later, or 17 years later, you know, if you want to give them an extra year, after 1960, you know, between 65 and 83, you know, you're talking about 18 years really. But let's give them an extra year, let's say 17 years. So you've had 17 years to study this stuff and recognize that Vatican II documents are heretical. If you're a priest or a cleric, it's your duty to know these things. I'm not a priest, I'm not a cleric. I wasn't even a Christian and I went to look this stuff up. So why would a cleric, why would a priest not know these things? He should. And if he doesn't, then I would say that that falls under criminal level of incompetence. So you're either intentionally criminal by, you know, being a heretic, or you're so incompetent that you might as well be a criminal because you're too incompetent to be a priest. So any priest, you know, that accepts Vatican II documents is heretical. And so if you want to be charitable, you can say that at least from 1965 onwards, anybody that accepts Vatican II is not Catholic, absolutely not Catholic. This is clear as day. It's in black and white. It's really easy to understand. But I don't believe that the Catholic Church has been run by Catholics since 1958, because the people who instigated, created, and produced Vatican II documents all started from the 28th of October 1958. That's when the first anti-pope of the current era came up. And every pope since then has been involved directly in the creation of the Vatican II documents and the promulgation of that heresy, and the creation of the new Canon Law in 1983. So in 1983, they basically said that this document became redundant. But it didn't, because the rules in this document invalidate every cleric from 1965 onwards if you want to be charitable. Personally, I think that if you were involved in the creation of the Vatican II documents, that makes you a heretic too. So as far as I'm concerned, the Catholic Church has not had a legitimate pope since 1958. Now, they've had popes, but they're all fake popes, anti-popes, and this is not new. The Catholic Church has had over 40 anti-popes before 1958, so it happens. It just hasn't happened in such a long stretch, for a continuous stretch, to have fake popes. But again, you know, if you read the Bible and you believe the stuff, then it's pretty much prophesies that the Catholic Church is going to rot from inside and it will become the seat of Satan, which is why Bergoglio currently walks around with a Satanist staff. It's known as a stang, and if you want to see a picture of it, I suggest you go and read Anne Barnhart. Now, Anne Barnhart, I like that lady a lot, I really do, but she is wrong, because she thinks that Ratzinger is a legitimate pope, and Ratzinger was one of the architects of Vatican II. So Ratzinger is not a legitimate pope, Bergoglio is not a legitimate pope, and in fact there hasn't been a legitimate pope since 1958. And you can go deeper into this, and you know, maybe I will in a subsequent video and so on. But anyway, that's the background. So what about the millions of people that think they're Catholic? Well, they're fooled, they're ignorant, and they're lazy. So if you think that you're a Catholic, but you don't know about the Pio-Benedictine Code of Canon Law of 1917, you haven't read it, you don't know what's in it, you don't know why Vatican II is heretical, then my question to you is, why do you think you're a Catholic? You're not. You don't know what's going on. You haven't got a clue. So I would suggest that that's a starting point. And we'll see how this video is received, and maybe I'll make some more.